In 1894 in Germany, a group of children were playing. One of them slipped and fell into the river. The current swept him away and he was about to drown until a priest named Max Trimmel appeared, who was leaving the church at the time. He found the child and saved him. This child, 40 years later, would be the main reason for the deaths of millions around the world. He was Adolf Hitler, the craziest, most controversial person to ever walk the earth, and an undisputed genius. Let us tell his story from the beginning. But before that, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and watch the video to get all the latest news. Hitler was born in 1889 in Austria. Austria and Germany were one country called the Austro-German Republic. His father was a bigot who treated him violently all the time. No one cared for him except his mother Carla, whom he loved madly, and until the last day of his life he carried her picture in his wallet. Hitler was a failure in his studies and left school when he was 16 years old. He traveled to Vienna, the center of the arts at the time, and began painting and selling landscapes. He went to the largest educational institution in the world at the time, the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, but was rejected. He began moving between the homes of the homeless and unemployed, selling his paintings in the hope of making a living. At that time, the Jews controlled all types of trade in Vienna, from usurious transactions to buying paintings at the lowest prices, then reselling them for large sums. This is what happened to Hitler. They would swindle him and belittle the quality of his paintings, all so they could take them at a low price, and this contributed to his hatred of the Jews greatly, as we will see in a moment. Anyway, after 2 years of struggle and humiliation on the sidewalks, he went bankrupt and could not find his daily bread, so he decided to return to Germany. When he returned, his mother had been diagnosed with cancer, and a few months later she died at the age of 47. It was truly one of the turning points in his life. If you notice, in all of Hitler's pictures, he always has a sad look on his face, which his personal photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann, described him as he had never seen someone with such sadness in his eyes. This was due to the loss of his mother, and her death is considered the first nucleus of his intense hatred of Jews, because the Jewish doctor who was treating her, whose name was Eduard Bloch, injected her with the wrong dose of iodoform, which was the approved treatment for breast cancer at the time. After that, his aunt raised him. After she died, he inherited a sum of money from her and decided to return to Vienna again, hoping to join the institute to learn drawing. He applied again and was rejected again. In 1913 he fled Austria to Munich for fear of conscription and was arrested. After examination, they decided that he was unfit for military service due to his physical weakness. 1 year later, in 1914, World War I broke out, and he volunteered for conscription and fought in World War I. This war had two profound effects on his body that would stay with him for the rest of his life. First, during the war he was wounded by shrapnel in the sensitive area between his thighs during the Battle of the Somme, which later caused him sexual problems. There is even a popular song that you will find on YouTube, which the English and Russians used to sing in the streets out of spite towards Hitler. It was called "Hitler Has Only Got One Ball."
Hitler has only got one ball, Goering has two but very small. Hitler has something similar, but more of Goebbels has all.
And history books mention that he was constantly given primitive sexual stimulant injections made of a mixture of testosterone plus semen plus the prostate glands of young bulls. The second effect is his short mustache. Just so you know, his mustache used to be normal and hanging on the sides of his mouth, but this made it difficult for the gas mask to stick to his face during the war. So he had to arrange it and remove the sides of the mustache, and that famous little line under the nose remained with him throughout his life. Not only that, it became a widespread fashion in Germany during his rule. Now let's go back to the important period during World War I, when Hitler fought bravely out of his great love for Germany, to the point that when the war ended, he was awarded the Medal of Courage. In 1918, while he was in the hospital receiving treatment, he received the news of Germany's surrender and the signing of the famous Treaty of Versailles, which was humiliating for Germany. Hitler went crazy and he felt a sense of heartbreak that greatly contributed to his disturbed and insane behavior until the end of his life. At that time he decided to enter politics. But what are the reasons for hatred of the Jews really? After the signing of the Treaty of Versailles, the bitterness of defeat dominated the German people. The Jews took advantage of the period following the wars of psychological defeat, and were the first to start introducing all kinds of vices to Berlin, from prostitution, gambling, and narcotic pills to the point of establishing adultery theaters in the middle of Berlin. They brought in flirtatious, feminine, explosive women, especially from France, and they promoted and encouraged freedom of homosexuality as well. It went so far as to establish entire institutions to vent men's hormones. I want to tell you that despite all these years, the Jews were working conscientiously, and their bad legacy still exists in Berlin. To this day, if you type in Google about the cities that have the highest global ranking in entertainment and mockery, you will find Berlin at the top of the list, and they call it the city of sin. Add to that their negative impact on the banks because of their involvement in usurious transactions. All this increased Hitler's anger at the situation in Germany in general and the Jews in particular, so he joined the German Workers' Party, which later became the Nazi Party. Because Hitler was energetic, hard-working, and eloquent speaker, and emotionally inclined, he was the party's leader in just 2 years, until 1923, when inflation and high prices had reached their highest levels. Hitler took advantage of the situation to incite the dismissal of the government, and he carried out a coup on a small scale. He gathered a number of muscular bodies of party men, whom he called the Storm Troops or the Brown Shirts Militia, which by the way would later become the party's military arm. They attacked the governor of Bavaria while he was in a meeting in a bar and told him either dissolve the government or meet God immediately. He had no choice but to obey, and they forced him to agree to dissolve the government. The next day he gave a speech to the people, and 3,000 people were with him. They went out in a demonstration that ended with their arrest, and Hitler was thrown into prison. It was an important period in his life, because he spent 9 months reading and wrote his famous book Mein Kampf, of which 10 million copies were sold. Hitler was convinced that there was no way to power except through elections. In 1929, there was a surprise: the collapse of the Wall Street Stock Exchange in New York, which led America to demand that Germany pay its debts. The economy became worse than before, so Hitler took advantage of the situation and began holding meetings and giving grand speeches everywhere, telling them that he had all the solutions to Germany's problems, to the point that he was giving 10 speeches a day. He actually won with a majority in parliament, and the Nazi Party was tasked with forming a government in which Hitler was the prime minister. Night of the Long Knives. Hitler's enemy after the Jews was the Russian communists, and in 1934 fate was on his side when the parliament building burned down, so he took it as an excuse and accused them of being the cause, and convinced the president to dissolve the communist parties, and after that he went on to make a dictatorial law called the Enabling Act, which gave the government absolute power to enact laws without presenting them to parliament for approval. Here lies the first revelation of Hitler's ugly Nazi face. He worked to suppress opposition from other parties as he closed their headquarters, confiscated their newspapers, and arrested anyone who opposed him. Within months, he was able to tighten his control over the legislative and executive authority. He did not stop there but began to kill his opponents within the Nazi Party outside the framework of the law, in one night and at a precise time. This operation is known as the Night of the Long Knives because of the killing of his opponents with knives. The real beginning of Hitler's legend in 1934, President von Handing died and Hitler became Führer. Because he was a smart dictator, he knew that the most important thing he had to do was to put the people in his pocket, and for this to happen he did 3 things. He improved their standard of living. After the unemployment rate was 6 million workers, it became 0. The German economy recovered tremendously, and after they were unable to manufacture a bullet except in secret places and on a small scale, because of the Treaty of Versailles of course, he began to establish weapons factories throughout Germany, and this contributed to eliminating unemployment. The second thing is the media and its effect on minds. He was keen to choose the smallest details himself, such as the best position for his photos that were placed in the streets. He would take pictures of himself in all positions and bring a group of people to show them the pictures and give a reward to anyone who would find a mistake or a sound opinion in his choice of pictures. To the point that due to his extreme megalomania and narcissism, he would stand in front of the mirror for hours practicing his speeches. The last thing, he completely eliminated prostitution and homosexuality, closed all brothels, and denounced and punished homosexuals. His goal was for people to abandon debauchery and turn to work and construction, and at the same time, encourage them to marry and thus increase the Aryan race. The important thing is that after the people's stomachs and minds were filled, the way was paved for Hitler to begin his real control. After Hitler took power in 1933, he gave a speech in the Berlin Stadium to the people and told them something that everyone made fun of him for, which is that he told them, "Give me 4 years and I promise to change Germany and make it a great country. I also promise that the unemployment rate will be 0. So let's see what he did. What made even his enemies testify to him was that the transformation he made for Germany was a miracle by all standards. The first goal was to raise the standard of living of the people, so he brought one of the most important architects in the history of Germany, Albert Speer, and said to him, "I want you to fill Germany with bridges and a network of highways that connect all of Germany. I want the people to love their country again." He ordered the construction of gardens, parks, and playgrounds in every neighborhood and street so that people can have fun and enjoy themselves. By the way, some of these roads are still in service today due to their perfection. Okay, these roads and bridges need cars to run on them, so Hitler asked them to bring him the most brilliant engineers. The choice fell on Ferdinand Porsche, the owner of the famous Volkswagen and Porsche factories, and he told him, "I want you to make a magic car, meaning I want a 100% German car, a family car, and a suitable size, and all of this at a low price within reach." And he told him, "If you do this, I guarantee you will sell 1,000 cars in the first month." And that is what actually happened, and they came out with one of the most famous cars in the world, the Volkswagen Beetle. He came out with a statement to the people with a timetable for a car for every German. And he brought a man named Werner von Blomberg and told him forget about the Treaty of Versailles and this insulting nonsense, and start building military factories. And he said, "We want to own our weapons and food with our own hands." And after Germany had no air force or navy and had approximately 100,000 soldiers without weapons, he now had 2,800 weapons factories employing 72,000 workers after they had been 4,000 before the start of his rule. Not just ordinary weapons factories, no, they invented weapons that humanity did not know at that time. And take a quick example, which is the Schwerer Gustav cannon, which is considered the largest cannon in history. And to imagine with me, it is enough for me to tell you that the length of its ammunition is the size of 2 men standing on top of each other. And they began to intensify manufacturing in the German Weimar Republic. But how can a country emerging from war provide this money? Spend on these factories and roads? Keep in mind that the man was sincere in his desire to raise the standard of living of the people, so there had to be creative, refreshing solutions that would not harm the people. He appointed an economist who is considered one of the brightest economic minds humanity has ever known, Dr. Hjalmar Schacht, and told him that he had spent 4 billion so far on construction and reforms, so find me a solution that does not include the following. No tax increases, no lifting of subsidies on goods and services, and don't say foreign loans. Dr. Schacht proved that he was a real doctor. So he started making something called MEFO bonds, which are bonds with very high interest rates that depositors get back after 5 years. These bonds helped finance rearmament without alarming other nations. Schacht also initiated public works programs such as the Autobahn to reduce unemployment. He controlled the balance of trade by managing imports and exports to stabilize the economy. Additionally, he maintained a stable currency through his role at the Reichsbank, effectively preventing hyperinflation. Since Hitler proved that he was a man who keeps his promises, people's confidence in the government increased and people rushed to buy these bonds. The value of these bonds reached 21 billion francs. One of the strange things he did that increased his popularity was that he addressed the people, telling them that a woman has nothing but her home and her husband, and that the husband's duty is to work hard, and that the German woman's duty is to devote herself to caring for the family and having children. He also made an award of the Cross of Honor for every woman who gave birth to 4 German children. That year, Germany recorded the highest birth rate in its history. Do you know what these reforms did? First, they brought back the workers to the factories after they were idle, and instead of 8,500,000 unemployed, they became only 1 million. Believe it or not, it did not eliminate unemployment in 4 years. No, there was a shortage of 500,000 workers in the workforce. which in turn led to an increase in salaries, and as a result, the crime rate decreased to an unprecedented level in Germany's history. As for women, when they stayed at home, the infant mortality rate decreased because they became more concerned about them. And since they had time to dress up, husbands' interest in their wives increased intensively, and German machines were ignited to score goals, resulting in Germany recording the highest birth rates in its history that year by 8 times. The ugly fascist face of the Führer. Of course, you are definitely impressed by the man, and your hands almost burned with excessive applause, but let's see the other side of the beloved leader so you can judge. After Hitler was assured that he had won the hearts and loyalty of the people and had an army and weapons, he began his revenge on those who participated in the Treaty of Versailles that humiliated Germany in 1938. He went and sat with the King of Austria, his birthplace, and told him that we want to open the two countries to each other politely, so he agreed, and Austria became a vassal of Germany, and Hitler entered Vienna as a conqueror in a majestic procession. After 10 years before that he had been wandering around it as a homeless person begging to sell his paintings to the Jews. At that time the old empire, Great Britain, was standing far away, watching the growth of Hitler's state. It feared for its many colonies in Africa, so it sent him one of the foxes to test the waters. He was the British ambassador, Neville Henderson. What do you think about joining hands and creating an international union for the countries of Europe, in which Germany would be the leader? This would be in exchange for keeping the situation as it is in Africa, with a promise of no German military intervention in Africa. Hitler would also have to commit to not expanding the German borders, or more precisely, no German invasion of any other country. Hitler refused and was very upset. How could another country dictate its terms to him? He said his famous sentence, "If I could stay 20 years in exchange for reclaiming the German colonies, I would." Let's focus now because we are entering World War II. There was a small region on the border between Germany and Czechoslovakia called the Sudetenland, and it was part of the Germans and was taken from them in the Treaty of Versailles at the request of France and annexed to the Czech Republic. Hitler sent a message to the government there that he wanted this region because it was part of Germany, and here there is a disagreement among historians because no one was able to determine whether Hitler was really aiming for the region, or whether he knew that they would not agree to return it, so this was a pretext for him in front of his people and the world to invade the Czech Republic. Now let's come to France, which had a treaty with Czechoslovakia in 1924, and when it heard Hitler's threat, it responded by saying that the security of the Czechs was our security, and if Hitler acted rashly, we would support Czechoslovakia. Then Great Britain, the world's largest country at that time, entered the picture and said that if France fought, we would also support it against Germany. When the invasion began in August 1939, let's focus on the months. He went to Stalin, the ruler of the Soviet Union, and told him, "Let's join hands and enter Poland. You take a part and I will take a part." England heard about this treaty, so it also made a treaty with Poland that included defending it in the event of war. Hitler did not care, and indeed in September 1939, the Germans and Russians entered Poland. Exactly 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany, so he continued his journey and entered France in a lightning war. On June 17, 1940, the French surrender memorandum was signed. To further humiliate him, he had them sign it in the same train car in which Germany had signed the humiliating Treaty of Versailles. Hitler offered peace to Britain. Churchill refused. Hitler launched air raids on the heart of London, and began with military airports and radars. However, Germany did not succeed in imposing its control over the airspace. June 1941, which was one of the most controversial periods in history, and we can say that this was the first nail in the coffin of Nazi Germany, as Hitler received news that Stalin had moved his army and occupied the Baltic states, and that he intended to betray him, so he was forced to start attacking him instead of waiting for him, and he sent 3 million soldiers to the border in an operation he called Barbarossa, which was the largest land operation in history. He occupied the Baltic states, Belarus, and Ukraine. He was actually on the verge of controlling Moscow, had it not been for the onset of winter, which prevented Hitler from entering Russia. What made matters worse was that Japan bombed the American port of Pearl Harbor in December 1941, and as a result America declared war on the Axis powers, Japan, Germany, and Italy. I want you to count with me the strongest army Russia, the strongest country Britain, the strongest economy America, and all the countries against Hitler and his comrades. In my personal opinion, the biggest mistake Hitler made was that he united his enemies. The important thing is that after Hitler failed to enter Moscow, he turned his attention to the Caucasus, where one of the greatest battles in history took place, the Battle of Stalingrad. The Russian Red Army succeeded in defeating the Germans, and this was the first surrender of the German army. Historians say that this was because Hitler did not withdraw after his failure to enter Moscow, and that it was not possible to fight with soldiers exhausted by the cold and lack of supplies, and this was one of Hitler's most famous failures, and with the increase in failures, a near mutiny occurred among some troops in the German army, to the point that Hitler was subjected to about 25 assassination attempts, but they all failed. The most dangerous of them was Operation Valkyrie in June 1944. In short, this was an army battalion whose job was to control matters and intervene in the event of Germany's fall as an alternative plan. The important thing is that some of the senior army leaders agreed to get rid of Hitler because from their point of view he would destroy Germany in the war. Indeed, one of them, General Weiselben, succeeded in entering the meeting room where the Führer was sitting, carrying 2 bags full of explosives. He actually succeeded in detonating them, and Hitler survived except for some injuries. Hitler was a smart man, and he told those who were present, "Don't announce that I'm fine for a few hours until I see who would do what to uncover their plan and bring down all the participants." Indeed, he was able to arrest them, and they were tried and executed. After all this fall, Germany was between the millstones of the American, British and French forces from the west and the Red Army from the east. They entered Berlin, which Hitler refused to leave. He was in a bunker under the Reich headquarters, and with him were the elite who refused to abandon him, namely Hans Krebs, and in Helldorf, Joseph Goebbels and Martin Bormann. When Hitler felt the end was near, he gave orders to demolish all the infrastructure and what remained of the weapons and ammunition in what is known as the scorched earth policy. He went on to marry his life partner Eva Braun 40 hours before his suicide. He held a party in such distress and distributed chocolates. Goebbels, his 6 sons and his wife committed suicide with cyanide. It is said that at exactly 3 p.m. on April 30, 1945, the Führer committed suicide by shooting himself, and Eva Braun, his lover, swallowed 2 cyanide pills. The remaining soldiers took the bodies to a hole behind the palace, poured gasoline on them, wrapped them in carpets and burned them. Thus ends the life story of one of the greatest, most evil, craziest and sadistic leaders in history. Now it is your turn. Share your opinion with us in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell button to receive all that is new.